Okay, 3.1 notes, types of studies. So it says data can be collected and analyzed in various ways in order to study a population. A population is a group we want to study. Or if we want info about them. In many studies, a sample is used. A sample is a part of the population. And it is used to estimate the entire population. So in this example, it says match the population with the sample by writing the letter on the line. So remember, population is whole, sample is part. So a part of the whole. So all Illinois residents. Well, that would be D, sample of 10 Illinois addresses. All U.S. high school students. That would be B, sample of 10 U.S. high school students. Look how they're very specific when talking about a sample from the population. Okay, all students at our high school. That would be A, sample of 10 of our school students. And the last one would be C, all students in our class, sample of 10 students in our class. Okay. So a value that describes a sample is called a statistic, and a value that describes a population, usually estimated from a statistic, is called a parameter. So think this, statistic, sample, they both start with an S. Parameter, population, both start with a P. Identify the population, sample, statistic, and parameter in the following examples. So P, S, statistic, and parameter. It says the average height of a 15-year-old female at our high school is 5'4". A sample of 10 females at our school have an average height of 5'7". So the population would be all 15-year-old females at our high school. The sample would be 10 females at our high school. The statistic, which relates to the sample, would be 5'7", and the parameter, which is related to the population, is 5'4". Okay. Next example says high school students in your county work on an average of 18 hours per week. A sample of 50 high school students in the county revealed that they work an average of 23 hours per week. So our population would be high school students in our county. Our sample would be 50 high school students in our county. Our statistic, which is related to our sample, would be 23 hours per week. And our parameter, which is related to our population, would be 18 hours per week. Okay. In an observational study, researchers observe subjects and measure variables of interest, but do not influence their responses in any way. There are no treatments applied by the researchers, and observational studies attempt to make conclusions about the population. Some observational studies attempt to study correlation. Just remember that correlation cannot imply causation. Then we have something called lurking variables. Lurking variables make it difficult to establish causal links as they cannot be separated or ignored in a study. Observational studies measuring in a natural setting, which makes establishing correlation for ethically challenging links possible. So, for example, in smoking and lung cancer, they observed a bunch of data about people who smoked and then later developed lung cancer. They did not experiment on people and say, okay, this group, you're smoking 1 pack of cigarettes. This group, you're smoking 10 packs of cigarettes a day. Let's see who gets lung cancer faster. Okay, that would be experimental, and that would be unethical experimenting. So this is just an observational studies where they're observing data that already exists because someone has already done some of these things. So for example, dieting while pregnant or alcohol consumption. Okay. In this example, it says for a sample of subjects, you record how many hours of exercise they get each week and the number of colds over a year. You find that there is a strong negative relationship between exercise and colds, which means the more exercise, the fewer colds. This means that the explanatory variable is going to be weekly exercise. And the response variable is going to be the number of colds. And it says, can you identify any lurking variables? So these are variables that we didn't account for, but could still change the study. Well, some of these could be, let's say, diet, okay, someone's immune system, okay, let's say they have a very weak immune system. That means no matter how much they exercise, we're not going to see a decrease in colds because they are more likely to get a cold in the first place. Okay, and then lastly, exposure. Let's say you work in a hospital, you're a nurse, you're constantly exposed to people being sick. No amount of exercise is going to get rid of that exposure that you had during the day. So you're going to be exposed to those colds, which means you're more likely to get those colds. Next one says to investigate the correlation between SAT prep and SAT examination within one school year, researchers collect data on a sample of SAT examinees from 3 different high schools. First, the researchers identify if the number of SAT prep classes these students attend, then they gather the SAT scores for each of the students. So the explanatory variable would be the SAT prep classes that these students attended. And then the response variable would be the SAT scores. Some possible lurking variables could be IQ. We can't change or we can't guarantee that every single person in our study is going to have a high or low IQ. Okay? We can't control the amount of sleep someone has before they take the SAT. And then we cannot control if they have any type of anxiety. So let's say they're a very good let's say they get very good scores when they're doing these practice exams, but when it comes to taking the exam, the pressure of it causes them to have testing anxiety and they don't do as well. Okay. Sample surveys. A sample survey is a form of observational study where researchers use questionnaires or interviews to collect information from a sample to learn about the entire population. Opinions or factual information may be obtained. A census is a type of survey, but it's meant to collect data on all individuals in the population. This is extremely difficult to do because not only is it almost impossible to collect all responses, this is very time consuming and will cost a lot of money and resources to do so. Okay. A sample is best when it is randomly selected. Okay. This means that it has the same probability of being selected. That means that the probability of selecting the sample is the same as the probability of selecting every other sample. That's what it means, randomly selected. If your sample is not randomly selected, then that could lead to bias, which may influence the study in favor of one outcome or another. Along with a well-designed random sample, a well-written survey will allow you to obtain reliable responses that represent the population of interest. Well-designed random sample represent the population of interest. When writing a sample survey, you need to decide the types of questions you want. You can have open, respondents write comments, essays, or free response text, so think FRQs. And then closed, where respondents choose from a fixed set of options, so either yes or no, multiple choice, or a rating scale. So think multiple choice. There are 3 key points you want to make sure you create a good sample survey. The first one would be to speak the same language. This is important because let's say you are trying to collect data for a survey, but you go to collect data and your entire survey is in Mandarin, okay? People might not be able to answer that survey question because they don't understand or know the language, okay? Same with, let's say your language is Spanish, okay? Since we're in Texas, it makes sense that some people might know Spanish, but that doesn't mean the majority of people will. So just make sure your language is the same as the audience that you're collecting data on. Make sure to keep it simple. And make sure there is no bias. Okay, it's not always possible to remove bias, but we want to try as best as we can to make sure that there is no bias. Okay, some advantages of surveys. There is various forms of collecting. So you could collect it telephone, online, face-to-face. They're very efficient. They can be designed to focus on needed response questions. So designed to focus on only needed questions. And then they can cover a wide range of topics. Disadvantages is that now you're depending on the respondent's honesty and motivation, and it can be flawed by bias. So what it means by honesty and motivation is, let's say you ask everybody in this room right now to shout out their GPA so you can start collecting data, okay? Let's say all the GPAs we're hearing is 3.8, 4.0, 4.5, 4.2, 3.9. Do you really think that a person who has a 1.2 GPA is going to want to shout out their GPA? No. So what we're dependent on is that person's honesty. Honestly, if they hear everyone else saying these high GPAs, they're more likely to put a higher GPA out there than the one they actually have. Okay, the next part is experiments. In an experiment, researchers impose treatment on experimental units. Okay, the purpose is to study whether a treatment causes a change in the response. When the experimental units are human beings, we call the units subjects. In an experiment, you must watch out for confounding variables. These are variables that are unintentional and can be hard to distinguish from explanatory and response variables. When an experiment is a controlled study, 2 groups are used for comparison. One group of participants is exposed to the treatment, and then the others are not exposed to the treatment, instead are given a placebo or a dummy treatment. All experimental units need to believe they experience the same conditions. We have what is called a placebo effect, and that is when a subject responds favorably to the placebo as if it was the actual treatment. We also have a single blind study, and this is when researchers are aware, but the subjects are not. And then we have a double-blind study where both the researchers and subjects are unaware who belongs to which group. Okay. The best experiments are usually randomized, comparative, double-blind, and placebo-controlled. So in these examples, we are going to determine if this is an experiment or an observational study. So a medical team examines the records of 5 large hospitals and compares the survival times of those cancer patients who had surgery versus those who had chemotherapy. This is an observational study. How do I know? Because they examine records and compared survival times of cancer patients who had surgery versus those who just had chemo. They didn't go up to these cancer patients and say, okay, you guys all have cancer. You 5 are going to have surgery. You 5 are going to have chemo. And you 5 are going to be our control group. And let's see who passes the fastest. Okay? That would be an unethical experiment. So what they did is just examine records that they already had. Okay, number 2 says, in a gym class, the effect of exercise on blood pressure is studied by requiring half of the students to walk while the other half to run a mile each day. This is an experiment because they're dividing these students into 2 groups and putting a treatment on them. The treatment for one is to walk a mile a day. The treatment for the other is to run a mile a day. At the zoo, they want to study the relationship between the length of a snake and the snake's weight. They take a random sample of snakes and record the information on the snake. Random sample of snakes, record the information. This is an observational study. Why? Well, there's no treatment. Okay? And then lastly, a group of smokers were randomly assigned to one of 2 groups. One group was told to continue smoking their cigarettes like normal, and the other was told to cut the number of cigarettes in half. Their pulses before and after were recorded. Well, this is an experiment, okay? Because the treatment that was imposed was telling half the people who already smoke cigarettes, so it's ethical, to smoke like normal, and then the other half to cut the number they smoke in half. So it's still ethical because we're not telling them to double the amount that they smoke, right? We're saying, well, in either cases, they're going to smoke this like normal, or we could potentially be helping them by cutting the number that they smoke in half.